Relation Committee. It is September 1st, 2021, and I will ask for a roll call. And now, this afternoon, I have the names that I have for our committee members are Councilmember Maureen Toms. Here. Commissioner Frankie Martinez.
Here.
Commissioner Tim Banuelos. Not here yet. Commissioner Ann Moriarty.
Present.
Thank you. And among our staff, I saw Mr. David Hannum.
Here.
Assistant City Attorney Alex Mogg.
Evening.
Mr. Michael Laughlin.
Present.
Thank you. Okay. All right. We have a quorum, and we have some staff to answer questions in case those come up of the technical sort. For the public, citizens to be heard is the next item on our agenda. Mr. Hannum, have we received any written comments from members of the public?
No, I don't have anything in my email.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Now, for participation in this meeting, we are conducting the meeting via Zoom, and the webinar ID is appears on the screen for those of you watching on the public access channel. Webinar ID 819-2111-8727, or you may join us by phone 1-669-900-6833. Once you join us, each speaker will be afforded 3 minutes to speak. There will be either a timer or one member of the staff who will note the amount of time for each speaker. Speakers will be muted until their opportunity to provide public comment. The video will be turned off for public participants, so we will only hear the comments. And when I open the public comment period, then we will hear those public comments, and we will close it as soon as we know that there are no more. When you are ready to speak as a member of the public, please use the raise hand feature if you are joining us via Zoom online, or press *9 if you are connecting via telephone. This will alert staff that you have a comment to provide. All right, I am now opening up the public comment period for anything other than what is on the agenda. And I don't see any members of the public. Staff, Mr. Hannum, do you see anyone?
No, I don't.
Okay. Assistant City Attorney Mogg, do you see anyone on screen?
I did not.
Okay. So I will close that. And as we proceed through the different items of the agenda, I will again ask if there are any public comments for those. Thank you very much. Next on our agenda is to continue the review of Old Town Design Guidelines. And Mr. Mogg, if you will take us through that. My recollection that we left at page 21, but I may be wrong on that.
So we can certainly go through that. I had that we had discussed some of the information in the landscaping section in 4.4, but perhaps we didn't finish that. I know there were some comments about A2 under 4.4.
Okay.
But perhaps that's a good place to start again under
okay.
section 4.4.
Let's do that. So I suppose that each of the committee members is somehow viewing the document that was part of the meeting packet to get us to that section so that we may all go over this together. Is it at all possible there we go, so that members of the public can also see where we are?
Yeah.
Thank you very much for doing that.
Down to the right spot. So there we are. I don't know if anyone has any comments about this section in 4.4. Now would be the time to provide them so we can keep track of those and include them when we update the document. And I know last time we also talked about updating the graphics in the document and bringing it into sort of modern appearance and formatting, which will be done once we have all of the committee's suggested changes.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. Members of the committee, from what I can see, I'll tell you what I can see, and the public will also know why we're conducting this meeting as we do. So on my screen, I am seeing two screens. One of them is a view of the document that we're reviewing, the Old Town Design Guidelines, and we're on page that has a header 4.4 landscaping, and the other side of the screen shows our Assistant City Attorney Alex Mogg, and so I cannot see all the other members of the committee in order to know whether you are ready to comment.
I have my hand up.
Thank you. Okay, so we will go with you, Councilmember Thoms.
Okay, I'm looking at my notes, and I have us starting at section 5. In my notes in 4.4, which I believe we discussed, in 4.4A2, we changed live plants to native drought tolerant.
Yeah.
And in 5, where it says existing mature trees, we changed that to existing native and mature trees. And in number 7, we changed the last word in that section from encouraged to required.
Those changes as well, Councilmember. And then in the parking, I have that, where is it? Changing reference to electric vehicles.
Yes,
And
I have that as well.
And then just changing the wording. I believe this is about the Uniform Building Code, changing it to be specify the California Building Code.
That's what I have as well.
So if there's no other comments on the end, I know that was the last section we did last time. So if there's no other section, comments on that, we can move forward to chapter 5 or section 5 rather.
Thank you, Councilmember Tom's comments and then mention of the regulation to the state one reminded me that yes, we had covered that. So let's proceed. I am curious, can anyone see other than the design guidelines on screen and Assistant Deputy?
I see everyone.
You do?
I see everybody.
Okay, then I have to.
So there's an icon in the upper right-hand corner where it says view, and you want to toggle down so that you have a large box on the left and 3 boxes on the right.
Got you all. I have you on.
Uh-oh.
Yes. No, in a good way. In a good way. Thank you. You got me about that. Thank you. All right. So yes. Any other raised hands? I don't see any now. Was that a raised hand? Raised thumb? Raised Commissioner Martinez.
Excellent, thank you, Mayor Martinez-Rubin. On this section on the commercial guidelines, regional development, are we looking, Alex, on adding the legal language that designates, like, if it's a building owner, if it's a joint tenants in common, identifying who these business owners are for this commercial guidelines? Because I think we need to spell out. It's not enough to just define the areas, but I think we're supposed to address who the building owner is. Is it a corporation? If there's a problem, who do we contact? Is it the CEO? Is it the treasurer of the company? Is it the secretary? Alex, do we have any language created that defines how we contact the individuals, and then if there's any issues with the properties?
I have to admit, I'm a little confused, Commissioner, because these are just the design guidelines, and they'd come in, whoever is listed on the application as the point of contact would be who staff would be working with. If it is not a property owner, the property owner generally has to sign the application also. So if it's a tenant, they have to have the property owner sign the application too, saying the tenant can be the person to submit this application, and that would be who staff would be coordinating with.
And we coordinate with just really the property owners of the building. So depending on who that is, whether it's a corporation or a person, that's who we do.
Well, Dave, I guess I'm trying to think of it as, once this is implemented, right? Let's say we have a problem with some of the property for whatever reason. Somebody changed out the lighting, something along those lines, right, and we're not able to identify how to get the folks and get the information out to them. There's some type of violation. And the example being, Dave, there was a piece of property just south of APN where the owner of the property was actually out of the country, and they were not able to cite them and get the correct processes started to correct the violations, because we didn't have any contact information. So it's more along those lines, trying to put in place the correct processes and procedures so that if we do have somebody in violation of any of these guidelines, that we have a system identified for what steps we're going to take to correct it, and what that looks like.
So there's an existing process in our code for code enforcement violations,
right,
where a citation, a notice of violation would be posted on the property and sent to the owner at the address on file with the county.
Okay.
And if someone is not checking their mail, then they're gonna one day wake up and have significant fines on their property.
Which would mean if there are tenants in the building, then we would remove the tenants.
Okay.
I mean, if it got all the way to that level, and because the property owner is not responding, then that's really, and Alex, you can correct me if I'm wrong, legally we can only deal with the property owner on these matters, not necessarily when we're talking enforcement, when we're talking about doing those types of things, that we deal with the property owner.
Yeah, we always, because it's a property, and there could end up with a lien on the property, we always notice the property owner too. It could be, one example is, if there's weeds in front of a property, high weed, a tenant might see the notice posted and just decide to take care of that themselves.
Yeah.
But it's ultimately, from the city's point of view, it's ultimately the property owner's responsibility. If the tenant, handles it, that's fine. We're happy it gets corrected. But if it doesn't get corrected, it's ultimately the property owner's responsibility.
Yeah. Okay. And sometimes, like with the bigger centers, they might have a property manager. So normally we have copies of who the property managers are. So like for, let's say, Pinole Vista, the owner might be in New Jersey, but the property owner is ROIC that's out of San Diego. So we would notify the property owner and we would notify the property manager. So that's usually, we don't go after the tenants per se, but we go after those two people. But it's the property owner first, and then there's a precursory notice to the property management firm.
Okay.
Just to let them know we're doing something.
Okay, so if we're okay with that, and you feel that we have enough guidelines and processes to address anything that's considered a violation on this, I'm comfortable with it, as long as you feel that you have enough current policies in place. Totally okay.
Okay, perfect. Yeah,
thank you.
I think we're good.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Appreciate the guidance.
It looks like we're moving along.
I have some comments on this section is on the commercial guidelines for regional development. I would consider that Sprouts is more of a regional development, and I can get one of the planners to tell me yes or no. And if that's the case, we are developing guidelines that are contrary to some of our development, like Sprouts, and wondering if we want to take a look at that, specifically related to setbacks on Pinole Valley Road with the Sprouts building and the other multi-tenant buildings. If we develop the guidelines that are contrary to how we've approved something versus taking that section off the map. And I think we talked earlier about not wanting to take that area off the map.
I hear you, Councilmember Toms. I don't have any immediate thoughts, but I want to acknowledge that Commissioner Banuelos has joined us, and thank you for doing so. We're particularly interested in your perspective, Commissioner Banuelos, given your background in architecture.
Yeah, sorry, I just got here. My schedule totally changed today. So.
Mm-hmm. And also your history in with the Planning Commission. Involvement and having seen some projects come before us, and now trying to align these guidelines with current.
And Councilmember Toms, I mean, it's completely up to the committee how to proceed. I would just say the design guidelines would only be applied prospectively. So unless Sprouts comes in for a application to change something, or they're gonna tear down Sprouts and rebuild it, then we would apply. But if they're keeping it as is,
right. One of the things that I'm looking at is say the bowling alley decides to, redevelop, and typically when you have development happening in some areas, you want to have the buildings kind of use the same setback line if they're in the area, and having a guideline that has a larger setback for, say, the bowling alley doesn't allow for that to happen in the future. And that's what I just want to bring that up so that we're aware of it. And if that's not really the intent, then we should look at modifying it, this section.
That's a really good point, Maureen. Is it excuse me, would it be possible to solve this maybe through using wording for like grandfathering? Is that possible? Do we have any language that we could insert that says certain areas will be grandfathered? Do you think that would work?
No, because the grandfathering would only occur for Sprouts and the stuff that's already built. I'm thinking of if the bowling alley were to, if that property were to be, redeveloped, say in 10 years or, sometime in the future. I don't want to have anybody panic thinking that that's, inevitable, but it's always possible. But wouldn't we want to have the flexibility for new development on that site be at the same setback as Sprouts and the other retail uses? And I think that section might be the only area that meets this definition for the regional, commercial guidelines for regional development.
So to answer the question, would we want to have the flexibility? I'm a little confused here. With regard to setbacks and the purpose for them, whatever length they are or width they are. One of them that comes to mind is safety. The other to pedestrians versus vehicles there might be in the same area. The other is access, so that people can access the buildings again safely. And the other, maybe, again, back to what the guidelines I think we're trying to do here is to have compatibility among structures regardless of their look. I mean, there will be some variety in all this area. So I'm not too sure about being as strict about setbacks. What would be the compelling reason to have them be consistent?
Well, it's a standard in planning and kind of in architecture that when you're, building buildings on a street, that they have a common setback for consistency. And the only one that I think is the issue is under A, building setbacks, where it says street 25 feet for non-residential interface. Can we have a relook at that? Because we've been looking at being more, neo-traditional or new urbanist as far as our setbacks are concerned. That's a newer thing that we're doing. And this, although this might be a remnant of the 90s, I'm not sure that we really want to maintain a 25-foot setback in this area. We didn't do it for Dr. Lee's building, and we didn't do it for Sprouts and the other commercial building with the Orange Theory, and we didn't do it with the dialysis center.
Right. So if I'm understanding correctly, we didn't do so means that we had the flexibility and we were not consistent. And therefore we have some variety on those tracks, on those lots. And the example, is that correct? Am I following correctly?
Right. But if that's the case on every development, we should look at this setback and modify it now.
So you'd want to, let's either we can modify it to say existing, because I'm looking at the Google map of right now of Orange Theory and Sprouts. And Sprouts, they're both probably about 10 feet. I mean, the bus lane, kind of the pull out, because Sprouts has the building that kind of cuts into that 10 feet setback. But the buildings probably looks like they're about 10 with the walkway and the it looks like and then the landscape part. So yeah, I mean, we could probably do something where it's in terms of the non-residential interface on the street. We could say, we could have a minimum in or instead of a number, we say a minimum. So you could have so at least there could be some differential based on the style of building, but we know that it's going to be no closer than 10 feet or no closer than 10. Is that kind of what you're looking for?
Yeah, that's what I'm looking for.
Okay, yeah. So I think that's doable. Is that we could just do more of a variable or have a minimum instead of the 25, which is we know that Sprouts is probably 10, and in some areas it's only like 5 feet because of the bus stop. Orange Theory is probably somewhere in the neighborhood about between 5 and 10 because I'm looking at it right now as I'm going with Google Maps down the street. Yeah, I guess Starbucks really, even though it's elevated, is probably only about 10 or 12 feet off the street. With the where the drive-through is at, from the drive-through to the street. So yeah, I mean, I think if we could settle on a minimum number and maybe describe that as a minimum number, it has to be a minimum of 10 feet back.
Yeah, I've done some plans in some areas where you even have a maximum. So you have the build to line. The other thing is, I'm not sure what the residential interface section, where that would apply. And if it doesn't apply to anything, can we strike that?
Well, but let me jump in here now. Now I forgot what you guys are talking about. Before we start unraveling everything here, just keep in mind, this is all part of the specific area plan that's already been fallen into, which had different setbacks.
I'm looking at, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And they were much closer. So it's kind of what you're talking about, I think already has been done. So I would want to be sure that we're still, we're still following what we have already set up for the specific area plans that we're dealing with.
Right.
The other thing is, to your point about what the residential portion of that is, in some of these specific area plans, there is a residential component, but it's always been assumed to be like on an upper floor, which has a secondary setback that's further back than the commercial level. So
yeah, but this section for regional development is only along Pinole Valley Road between Henry and I-80. So it only is that section. It's not the section that's like across from Collins. So it wouldn't impact any of those residential areas. So that's why I have the question of, what residential interface would there be? I might not be understanding it, but I think that ship has sailed. There's not any, and there's not going to be any.
What's the current zoning for example, for the bowling alley right now?
The bowling alley is OPMU. Oh, wait, no, the bowling alley, let me see. Going down the street, on the road. The bowling alley is CMU.
Okay.
Yeah, as you come across, make the turn. Yeah, the Sprouts Center is OPMU. Office professional mixed use.
So there's not a real residential component to that as it stands right now.
No. The only residential component is on the back side. Well, it's on the back side of all of those buildings across the creek on the Sprout side, and then up the hill would be up the hill on Henry. So those are all raised up.
Well, I could easily see that property being presented to us as something where they want to do a residential portion on top of a commercial or an office portion. But it would have to be set back similar to how it is in Old Town, I would think. So, and these days with everyone scrambling for residential space, that may be something we may want to consider, and not think of this as two-dimensional, but think of it as three-dimensional, because we're talking about space, upper space now, as opposed to just a plan. So I'm just throwing that out there as an alternative. I do agree with Maureen that whatever building line is on there could be closer to the street, and it is already. So, but anything else that was a commercial could be set back with a secondary setback, like we have, like I said, down in Old Town. The higher you go, the further back it goes, and we could do something like that there if that was the desire of all of us to do as a possibility for future. So we have an option of having an additional portion of potential residential.
Okay, that does make sense. That the residential interface could be a second story. On
there, it could be a third story too.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
The advantage to that is that one of the complaints about doing the taller portion downtown was, well, what about the shadow line going the other way? Are you dropping a shadow on something behind it? In this case, we wouldn't necessarily be doing that because the creek's behind it. So there's no blockage of daylight on anything built behind that. So this could be an area where we could have an option to do something a little more multi-story if somebody wanted that kind of thing there as a specific project within at that property in terms of potentialness. Now, if we're talking about a global thing throughout, citywide or specific area plan wide in other places, that may not totally hold. But specific to this property, that's something that we could explore.
I'm wondering to move on, can we sort of put a bookmark on this and make sure that we revisit the setbacks so that they are consistent with the specific plan?
If I may, my question is regarding specifically the table 6.10 in the specific plan, which is on page 6.0-40, page 40. And so my question is does that table of setback requirements refer to housing, residential, or does it refer to commercial? I couldn't find a difference between the two as I was looking through the plan. So if Maureen, if you'd like to table it to the future, perhaps we should reference that table if it is applicable. And David, Mr. Hannum, you could tell us if that is applicable.
Well, I'm looking at it right now, and it just says Table 10, 6.10. If you go to the page before, displays setback requirements for each sub area in Pinole Valley Road. So it's for all of the areas within the Old Town and the service area mixed up. So it's from the build to front line, it's 0 to 5 feet. In Old Town and in service, the minimum sides are 0. Unless it's a budding residential, then it has to be 15. And same with the rear. So within the Old Town, though, within the Old Town sub area, the maximum build to front line standard may be increased through project review in order to reduce conflicts with neighboring development patterns. So yeah, we're probably going to have to come back to this one and be so that it is consistent, because the specific plan does talk about frontage types and building types and that type of stuff. And so I think we need to probably come back to this one and do a little more research on it.
And I was trying to find the language, and I couldn't find it off quickly, but somewhere in either the ordinance text or the resolution adopting the guidelines, we included language saying that you're required to comply with the Old Town design guidelines, but complying with them does not mean you have to 100% meet. You could be deemed to comply with the guidelines even if you weren't consistent with a couple of applicable policies or guidelines in the code, that it was a sort of a holistic thing. So that would also allow, especially in a case where the specific plan provides for a different goal or something, as a reason to sort of find something still consistent with or complying with the guidelines, even if its setback is a little smaller than what this section says.
So I'm trying to maximize the time we have here together without necessarily going to yet another meeting for fine detail, to try to capture the essence of what it is we're doing. So this matter, or this issue of consistency, compliance, ease of following a guideline by staff and an applicant, on this very matter, again, help me out here. Are we talking about generally as a committee the interest in having some flexibility in the setbacks in that particular area of town that includes the gateway
That doesn't seem to be the issue. The issue is that there's two different sets of guidelines in two different adopted documents, and we don't want to exacerbate that. We can correct that right now, or not right now, but when we have staff take a look at it, it can be corrected.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And we could certainly, if the committee wants, just remove that section, and then the specific plan guidelines would be the only guidelines on that. A property still needs to comply with the specific plan guidelines and anything in the zoning code. So if we remove that the section A about building setbacks, they would just have to comply with whatever is in the specific plan.
Yep.
Yeah, I would think the specific plan would take precedence anyway as a planning direction anyhow.
Yeah.
Where there's a conflict, it would take precedent. Theoretically, if it says 10-foot setback, you have to have at least 10-foot setbacks, and this says you have to have at least 25-foot setbacks. That's not actually in conflict because you're still complying with the specific plan's minimum setback requirement. But it sounds like it may just be easier to remove this section A so that only the specific plan is applicable.
And if we did that, can we insert some language here that says refer to this other document? Because I can see how it could be easily missed. It being whatever setback requirements there are in place that one has to adhere to.
Yes.
So not completely ignoring it, but referring to the document that is most applicable.
Yeah.
And that way, I appreciate that. That way, this committee doesn't have to go into the granular aspects of this.
And you wouldn't have to renumber.
No, well, I'm thinking too. You know, we're going to get to the point of discussion here in this with this group about the review and why there is staff to review, and why even if for staff the initial review seems not to be, you know, as simple, then there's a part of the process would be then to call the next set of eyes, which would be to be determined, you know, for our discussion later. Okay, thank you. May we continue?
I don't know if anybody has comments until page 33 under height and mass. But I have a note that talks about what about transition areas to higher density, where there's guidelines that talk about what the height and mass is, and that it's got to be compatible with the height and mass of existing residences. But we're getting into a point where we have density bonuses with, you know, exceptions that allow developers to go up in height. And I think we probably need to, you know, mention that, you know, there are exceptions to the rules. And then what do we do about, you know, say you have the 811 San Pablo Avenue that's 3 or 4 stories high, and then you have another building next door that's 2 feet high. What's, you know, what would be the infill? What would be the rules for the infill that wants to go next door? So that's kind of where I'm just wondering about, do we throw that out? Do we have transition? Is that a concept that, you know, given the setting for the need for housing, does that go away? So I just wanted to throw that out there.
So
it's going to depend.
This has to do just strictly with residential. Now we've moved into section 6. So residential design guidelines, new construction. So this is new construction, not remodel. And so I think the first question is, are we talking multifamily or are we talking single family homes right here? Because that would affect some of those questions that you're bringing up, Maureen.
Well, I think it's, you know, you're only going to get a 3 or 4 story building if it's multifamily.
The height. Yeah, in the old town it's 40 feet or 3 stories.
Yeah, and I don't think we should have it just for new construction only, because I can easily plant a 3-story appendage on top of a 2-story building and get that to work. So I think making it only new construction, if the new work overwhelms the existing part there, someone has like a 2-story building, want to add 3 more stories to it, if that overwhelms the existing building, it's like new construction. So I wouldn't necessarily throw out something like that, you know, and just do it to because that's how as an architect, that's how I get around it. Mm-hmm. So and as an example, there's a building in Berkeley right on University in Shattuck that was a 2-story retail building for decades, and now they've added about 10 stories to the top of it.
Oh wow.
And so, but they did a very nice job of it. But that's the kind of my example I'm thinking of in terms of, you know, something that overwhelmed the existing building, because that could easily be done. So I think on situations where there's a significant increase of mass and area relative to what's there originally, then I think in those kind of cases, new construction rules would apply.
What documents exist that refer to height restrictions in this part of town?
The specific plan, the Pinole Valley Road specific plan, part of Old Town, and then of course San Pablo Avenue corridor would cover the other part of Old Town. So in terms of this project, Pinole Valley Road would probably be the majority of the Old Town. However, there is some stuff on the other side that could be part of the San Pablo. And the height requirement in the Pinole Valley Road section in the Old Town is 40 feet or 3 stories. There are some special height requirements which talk about the massing as you go up after the 3rd story of the setbacks, either 45-degree angle or 12 feet, depending on so basically half of 1 story back. So it does have some setback requirements as the building goes up. San Pablo.
Please note that this is in the specific plan on page 6.0-21. So that's where the height requirements that Mr. Hannum is referencing are found.
For Pinole Valley Road, yeah. For San Pablo.
Sorry, that's San Pablo Avenue. Mm-hmm.
And for the Old Town is still 40 feet or 3 stories. So basically all of Old Town is 40 feet or 3 stories. And the mixed use areas, if there are mixed use areas within the specific plan, it goes up to 50 feet or 4 stories.
Okay, again, my simple mind makes me want to approach this by referring to what's already in place if it's sufficient, abstracting, even if it's the same language, abstracting from the specific plans onto a document that's particular to Old Town. So it becomes part of that document and it's in both places, or making a reference in the Old Town guidelines to the document that's more complete, which seems to be the specific corridor guidelines. If those are current, if those meet current standards and considerations about possible housing developments, etc. I'm trying to keep to what our charge is. It's getting a little bit more complex, probably certainly unanticipated, I think, but also because we don't have the answers, right?
Well, I mean, in section 2 of height and mass, it talks about maximum building height should be 2 stories or 35 feet. So that's consistent. Well, it's a little lower than the Old Town in the specific plan. But remember, this document was made well before the specific plan was even in existence. So that's the other thing.
Yeah.
So this document was created in 1997. The specific plan wasn't created until 2010.
Right. So are the 2000 the documents that were created in 2010, which are specific plans, are those as current as they ought to be, which is a different assignment for a different group of people?
Yeah, that's it.
Right? What can we do? What can we use those? Should we use those? And that's the decision for the committee, for the document that we have before us. We can
we should make this document we're reviewing now be consistent with the specific plan, and it is not right now. So is that something we can also put a bookmark in that section to bring forward the specific plan language?
Mm-hmm.
And let's remember what the goal is. I mean, the goal is, and specifically on page 31 of section 6, it says the goal of this section is not to replicate Pinole's historic styles, but to encourage new construction that acknowledges the architectural style of existing structures. So that's what's important, that we keep that in mind, and it should be, as brought up, consistent with the specific plan, which references these guidelines in numerous places. So it's kind of amazing to me that these guidelines got lost. But yes, the back and forth to avoid confusion should be there, but keeping in mind what the goal of what we're doing here is to maintain the character of Old Town Pinole. And that is a very specific charge. And I appreciate that, Mayor, that you're trying to keep us from getting too much into the weeds that are not helpful.
Well, we're reminded of the complexity and why it is helpful that what we're doing here to those who will not make the time or even are aware of multiple documents that the city may reference. And of course, for staff to know that, a document isn't going to stand on its own. I mean, I'm sure staff already knows that. Probably what you want to affirm is that there is some validity to your thinking, that it's not as simple, and that's why it requires multiple people to review an application. All right, so have we settled on what we're going to do with this section and the question about transitioning from one building to another that has that could potentially have multiple heights to it?
I think I'm comfortable with the transition section because we have flexibility. It's just the height. I think we need to take a look at the specific plan and update this document so it's consistent with the specific plan.
Yeah, I would agree with that because the specific plan is the most recent plan as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so I just want us all to be clear when we say we're going to look at that specific plan again. Are we talking about this committee? Or
no, I think staff can do that. Staff can do that, and I would think that if we finish our work tonight, and this is going to go to the planning commission again or the council, staff can just point out the two areas that they were directed or asked to update so that it can be called out.
Okay, other committee members concur?
Yeah.
I see nods. Okay.
That's fine.
Thank you.
Yes.
My next section is on page 35, number 10. And that has to do with second units or ADUs. I think that we just need to strike this section. I think that's probably the best way to handle that, since we don't really get much of a say. The state law prevails.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So a committee believes that technically, Mr. Mogg, what would you say?
Yes. As to ADUs, state law controls other types of accessory buildings. It's different, but for ADUs, state law controls and really limits the city's authority.
We can ask, but
Right. I mean, instead of striking it, should we just have the language in there shall be, or whatever is the most encouraged to be, because it's still important language, right? That accessory buildings, including garages and carports, are encouraged to have architectural treatments, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, this one is just for second units, though.
yeah, it's just number 10.
Yeah, that's totally second units. Yeah.
I'm looking at on page 37.
Oh, we're on page 35.
Okay, so you're going to have to tell me give me a letter.
Where it says rear setbacks in B, rear setbacks.
Yeah.
Number 10.
Got it. Okay. All right. I was looking at the ADU section that's coming up there. Got it. Thank you.
Okay.
So that would be, I guess, if we go by the state rules, then that would put it down to 4 feet, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Now, which is weird because when they figured that out, they said 4 feet, but what happens is that you're in conflict with the building code where it says less than 5 feet, you're at a fire rated perimeter.
Mm-hmm.
So I know when I do ADUs, I always do it 5 feet so people can actually have windows and doors in them. So I mean, we can go with the state as starters, but you have to know as a planner, David, that that could be a struggle for somebody. So
yeah,
that's just ADU trivia. So
yeah, I mean, because everybody's lot's a little different. That's the other thing too, is you might not have the room based on the size of the lot. So yeah, we deal with those as well.
And the other thing with that's assuming a brand new structure. It sounds like to me, if you have an ADU which was going into like an existing garage structure, which I've done 3 times now. A lot of cities say, well, your garage is there, so don't worry about the setback or the heights or whatever, because your garage is it. So the question is, do we or can we follow that along? I'm not aware if that's a state thing or if that's just relative to cities. State
law says if an existing structure is converted to an ADU, you can't require any more setbacks.
Right.
They can build on the same footprint.
Yeah, and they can build within the volume if it's taller.
Right.
Okay.
Hey,
I have something on page 36. I don't know if anybody has anything before that.
I just have one comment. So we were talking about striking item number 10, but how about item number 9? Was that because that also mentions second units, and that also is in conflict with state law.
It says excluding second units.
It says excluding second.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize.
Yeah.
Never mind.
and I'll tell you what's happening right now. If someone wants to build a non ADU accessory unit for whatever reason, like a workshop or something, and they get a lot of heat because they don't get what they want, they'll say, well, let's just call it an ADU then.
Right.
They do it, and they use the ADU rules. It may not be an ADU. It may have a setup for a kitchen and a bathroom, but it's really going to be somebody's workshop, as an example.
Yeah.
Right.
okay.
So, on page 36, number 5, and the letters for this is under building design C5. And I'd like to hear from Tim or anybody else who's got, more architecture and design background, where it talks about stairs should be boxed and framed. A lot of the work that I've done, we really pay attention to the SEPTED principles, which is crime prevention through environmental design, that don't like to have boxed in stairways and porches. So, I mean, is the architectural design more important than like SEPTED design? Do the two conflict?
Yes.
I'm not familiar with the term SEPTED design, Maureen. You're going to explain that to me.
Community policing through environmental design. So that's kind of the idea where you're going to trim your bush. You're going to have your front porch entryway towards the front of the front of the building.
Okay. Yeah, we talked about that a couple of meetings ago, huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
That kind of thing. It's something where, some perpetrator can't hide. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious if folks think that that's an issue or not.
I kind of think that's a good idea for a couple of reasons other than the safety factor. Usually when you have entrances into a unit, wherever it is, you want to make it identifiable so you know where the front door is. So that's kind of a basic design 101 thing. If you're looking for some way to, I guess not boxing it in, that's kind of practical in terms of you don't want a place for someone to hide behind. And things are kind of going that way anyway in the design world, just as a safety factor. Whether we, legislate that's our choice. The kind of the good design feel of that is that you don't do that anyway. We could reinforce that by putting some kind of rules on that, and that wouldn't be improper. But so I would tend to kind of lean that way. to the point of which where there's no longer, where there are structural things that you have to have something hold something else up, or it's not blocking anyone's sight lines. You're trying to back out of somewhere or turn a corner somewhere or something like that.
Yeah. So the way that this reads, it says all stairs should be boxed and framed by attractive and stepped solid walls or balustrade railings. And
well, you can have solid walls that they just go to the ground, but that they step up or something, or they're lower to fall along with the handrail heights. You can do that and still be solid walls. In fact, you wouldn't want that to be open to the bottom if it's like that, because you could hide under the underside of the stair, for example. Mm-hmm. So solid doesn't necessarily mean it goes all the way up to the full height. It could be it just means that the structure around it is solid, or it's a wall, for example. You could still step it down as you go down the stair, and maybe that's what we say, that they're still open and solid, but they're open enough so it doesn't block any sight lines or something like that, which is kind of how things are going right now.
So with that in mind, how things are going with regard to safety?
Safety is driving that mostly.
Yeah, I know we're talking about this one item, specifics about stairs and what surrounds them.
I just don't like that whole boxed in thing. To me, I don't know what that means as an architect. To me, that almost sounds like you're enclosing the whole stair, which is something you wouldn't want to really do. So it's just that whole phrase is very confusing to me. So I would almost want to rewrite that anyway.
Well, I mean, we could also put a drawing by it as well, some type of drawing that kind of shows what that is and what that means.
And that would help. And when you use drawings, the ones that help are the ones where you say, yes, do this, and then the one next to it says, no, don't do this. And we have those in our guidelines already. So that's always really helpful as an example, because then that's read as, okay, things like that. It's not just that one picture, it's things like that picture. Right. And that's a little bit easier for regular people, not just, designers and architects and stuff to get that as well. So
thank you for keeping it in mind. But along those lines, that broader principle of safety, is it applicable in any other sections of this entire document, the guidelines, where we could have that up front? Or rather, I know we're focusing and brought it to attention because of the stairs here. Mm-hmm. And if we can, and it seems at least three of us here, including me, who is now speaking about it, would favor that, and we would want to have design such a way that the safety is maximized.
It kind of just depends how we want to craft the language, because planners, and Maureen, back me up on this if I say this wrong. Planners, first thing they think about is height and bulk, and so you have whatever you have for it. Yeah, but the generic of that is height and bulk. And then within the height and bulk, then you have the secondary things, where the next thing you talk about is the approach or the entry or circulation, and that kind of stuff is the next thing after that. And so it could be something, right? It could be something that's set at the front, but it would have might have a little bit of detail, but it doesn't have to go too far, if that makes sense.
I'm not talking about the physical front. I'm talking about as a principle throughout the document.
So am I.
Okay, good.
Okay, so I think we're going to see if we can find a drawing to add on that.
Mm-hmm. Or we could make one. That's it's easy to. Or if we have, or the other alternative is find some pictures, because pictures work too pretty well.
Yeah.
Okay, and I'm going to harp on it because I think it sounded helpful. Again, if we want to have the principles related to safety, keeping design principles that enhance safety in mind. And I don't know what the language is. It's somewhere in this document at the top. Is that something that's easily found by planners?
Yeah, we'll be able to find it. I'll work with. I can work with Tim. In fact, he gave me a whole book on stuff, so I'll be able to look through that. There's we'll be able to find something that we'll be able to add in there. Just kind of show.
And the starting point would be looking at some of the guidelines and from our immediate neighbors. San Pablo has a lot of stuff in theirs that I don't even think they get a chance to use most of the time. Pittsburgh and Antioch. Pittsburgh had some stuff that was good, particularly commercial. They had a really good thing on signage in Pittsburgh as a detail. And so all our cities around us that have already done this have some pretty good examples, and they use a lot of pictures. And pictures really work out a lot rather than reading a bunch of words.
Right. Okay.
Okay. I have anybody else for 37 or 38? Because I have one on 38.
Keep going. Thank you.
Okay. On page 38, F4, where it says special windows such as bays and dormers should be used to add interest and domestic expression of the facade. I would just add the phrase, if consistent with the architecture. I have used an example in Old Town where it does change the bay, but it's not great architecture. And so just by having the language in there that, windows such as bays and dormers should be used, we want it to be consistent with the building architecture.
Yeah, that makes sense. That also brings up another kind of side question to that is a lot of times when you put in bays like that, you may or may not be going over a setback line. So when we talk about bays, are we considering potential exclusions to whatever, and in this example would be a front setback? Because some cities do that. You'll say you have to stay at front setback, and there'll be an exception saying, well, if you want to do a bay window, it only can go out so far, and it can only be a certain percentage of the front, as an example parameter. That is something we may want to consider if we have something like that. But I do agree with you, Maureen, because you don't want someone just slapping a bay on there because we say they can.
Yeah.
Well, to your question, Tim, again, the purpose of setbacks is?
Setback. I mean, building setbacks. To make sure you have enough light and air around a given building relative to the other given buildings around it. The planning setbacks almost always never seem to be in line with building code setbacks, and a lot of times they don't have to. But the next line of death in terms of that kind of stuff would be the actual building code setbacks, because there are those. Usually in the front of a building facing the street, you're pretty good all the way out to the middle of the street in a lot of building types. As it's usually the sides that are the things, and the initial magic number is 5 feet away from the side property lines, where a 1 hour rated system has to be started, and there's limitations on opening areas and things like that. And when you get down to 3 feet, then you've gotten to the point where you can't have any openings. So that's the building code range. So, but that's purely fire. That doesn't take into account shadows, light, and just area around a building that you may want to have just for the for a feel how you want to have the building situated.
Yeah, and in our code, I think it's more of the side. It is more of the side. There are provisions that you can encroach by like 18 inches. So
and it's usually for a certain amount of length or a certain amount of percentage of area or whatever.
It's for like chimneys and bay windows and those
and eaves and
like in Oakland, you can extend a bay into a front setback as long as it's less than 50% of the width of the front elevation that it's going off of, as an example. So it's a real tough balance, because while I agree with Maureen about making sure we kind of make sure it matches the architecture, but you have to be careful about how much you want to limit it as well. Because sometimes you put one on that it's too small, and it ends up going from a bay to a zip. So you have to really, and a lot of that would be taken care of by whoever planner looks at it too. So I'm not too worried about that. But it's just I was thinking mostly of do you want to have any kind of exclusion or exception rather, if they're in a situation where they want to put a bay window on it, but it's going over the front setback line, or the more extreme version of that is if the building is old and already is with past the setback, are we going to allow them to put a bay in it in the first place? So say we have a front setback of 20 feet in a particular zone, and the building was built in 1920, so the building is at 15 feet, and they want to put a bay window that pokes out a foot beyond that.
Well, we have a process, a variance process they can go through.
Yeah, but you don't want to spend $3,000 in 6 months on a window. I don't think that's worth it.
So I would just add,
excessive.
These guidelines can't overrule what's in the specific plan or the municipal code. So unless we incorporate that exception to the existing setback into both of those codes, it wouldn't be effective because you'd still have to comply with whatever the setback is in the municipal code or in the specific plan.
Well, that brings up a good point. We're going through this exercise, and we're talking about the specific area plans and things like that, but we haven't addressed if we're getting into the zoning ordinance. Because this in particular is you're right. This could be a conflict with the zoning ordinance. So how far do we want to go as we fix this stuff? We could go into making a change in the zoning ordinance if it was advantageous to allow that kind of a thing, And some things may need to do that to make it fully successful.
Seems to me this is one of those make a note on the side for possibly consider consistency with the Muni Code. But what comes to mind as well is the number of situations that present themselves to take the time to go through that part of an exercise, a review exercise, and changes and hearings and all that's necessary.
Yeah. And just a side note, whenever you change guidelines, it usually affects everything is somewhat connected. So once you start affecting one, it starts affecting the other ones. And so you have to either go uphill, what we call uphill, or you have to go downhill, which most of it is downhill. You start with the zoning ordinance and come down into the guidelines, or you start with the specific plan and go through the zoning ordinance and come down to the guidelines. So we can make note of that and take a look at where we are with the Muni Code and where we are with some of these special treatments and see what we can do. And if it requires that, then we will come back and tell you if we want to change it in the guidelines, then we're going to have to change the ordinance or draft specific language just for the guidelines to refer to the ordinance or refer to the specific plan or something of that nature.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's not something that would occur in a development that is more recent. This would be something that would most likely occur in Old Town, where the buildings were there before there was zoning in some places.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can think of a place like on John Street and those buildings.
Yeah, it's a good example.
They're really close. And if somebody wanted to put a bay window on those fronts, it would encroach into the setback. So, yeah, the only avenue we would have on that is a variance based on that. So, unless there was some other language crafted through the zoning ordinance, through the specific plan, down to the design guidelines to be able to change that. So,
yeah, and I do believe that, and this is kind of like a practical look at it, is that we should probably have, in some example of someone wanting to do something in that area, we should have some kind of option to do that, because if you hit it hard and you make someone do a variance for something like that, the variance could cost more than the window.
Yeah.
So which kind of, to me, when the law is more than the thing you want to build, there's a flaw with the law.
Thanks for bringing that up.
Okay, I didn't have any other comments on section 6.
Okay. Well, and we're going through this, and where we might have language or very clear guideline, it still requires some discretion and judgment on the part of whoever does the first review. And I think we can't entirely solve or get around that, even with guidelines. So I'm trying to settle in my mind that there's going to be the possibility of needing to allow staff to have some discretion. And again, when that is triggered for whatever reason upon review of architectural plans, etc., then that's when we get into what's the next step in a process, and are there existing mechanisms to help resolve what's in question or at issue.
Well, I think if there was a decision that was needed and staff made the initial crack at the decision and say the applicant didn't like it, I think their option would be to go to the planning commission at that point to see if the commission agrees with that or sees what they want to do or something in the middle.
Right. I'm just I'm being reminded again with some of the things that we've encountered so far. So yeah, thank you. Yeah, just let's continue, see where else we might need to resort to, again, thinking about the next part of our charge.
Okay, I have stuff on section 7, but I don't want to move unless everybody's ready to move.
Any other comments?
Yeah, only on 6.3, the landscaping. On A, general, and number 3, the use of native and drought-resistant plants, shrubs, and trees is encouraged. Again, that should be in line with what the state requires as far as the water, the drought-resistant plants.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense.
You could just say in accordance with the WELO law I'm just showing WELO standards.
Yeah. Okay. And is there anything that any of us want to say about the driveways and parking on vehicular access? Is there anything there on page 40?
How are we handling ADU parking? Because a lot of cities do it a lot of different ways. They go from not requiring it to not requiring it if you're within half a mile of 2 bus lines, to allowing tandem parking on a existing driveway, or to even allowing official parking within the front setback. Those are kind of the 4 basic ways they're kind of dealt with ADUs. Because I would think that's missing in this right now, because that's another thing that's going on. And I know this is fairly old in terms of the current fad of less parking right now. So, and so it's kind of how do you want to treat that?
Have we treated it in any other document?
In the zoning code.
The zoning code?
I'm looking right now. See section.
And the specific area plans, when they were done, as those were developed, they did kind of reduce parking requirements. Because I recall a lot of argument about people that wanted more parking versus people that wanted it to be reduced, based on where the projects would be and things like that.
And I like your idea that we probably should update this and add the language. And specifically, when we think there was a gentleman that's building a house, and it did have the ADU. Now, he was very considerate of his neighbors where it had the 3-car garage, so 2 for the main tenants and then the additional unit for the ADU part.
Mm-hmm.
I
remember that one.
That conversation that we had.
Yeah,
he was really considerate in his design, but we've got to take into consideration other folks may not be as considerate. So
Yeah, like most of them.
Probably should try to. Yeah. So, Dave, is there any way we could update this with newer language?
Well, in our zoning code, which is section 17.70 that deals with ADUs, the parking requirement basically is that the ADU shall be provided with one additional off-street parking space per ADU or bedroom, whichever is less. However, no additional parking spaces shall be required for an ADU, which is either A, part of an existing or proposed primary residence or an existing accessory structure. So basically, if you have an existing footprint, you don't need an additional. You're located within a 1/2 mile of a public transit stop, located within an architecturally and historically significant historic district, is located within 1 block of a car share vehicle, or E, in a location where on-street parking permits are required but not provided to the occupant of the ADU. That's
pretty specific.
Yeah.
Those are the required exceptions under state law.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So our code requires the maximum amount of parking that state law allows.
Yeah.
Okay,
So then do we just reference the other documents?
Yeah, probably. Since that's what we have to do.
Okay.
Fortunately, there's a lot of room in that could be solved by a lot of different ways. So that's what's nice about that.
okay. Here we have a solution there. Good. Anything else? Anne? No? Thank you for bringing that up.
Okay, you ready for 7?
We are.
Okay, the second paragraph under section 7, we need to fix the reference to the design review board.
Oh, yeah.
And then I have stuff on section 8. I don't know if we're ready to leave section 7 yet. Okay, seeing none, I'll on the second paragraph on sign guidelines, where it says large and flashy signs. And I had brought this up when this first came to council, is that, the sign for Tina's probably wouldn't be allowed under these design guidelines. And we probably want to allow that kind of stuff. The Bear Claw has the old school signs because they were complying with, the code at the time they got their new sign. And, I want to make sure that Tina's sign doesn't become a, legal non-conforming sign, and that the Bear Claw would be allowed to do a similar sign if they so chose. Mm-hmm. Because I think it's an attractive design. I think it's the issue is the fluorescent lighted signs. So I'm not sure how to, exactly where we need to modify the guidelines to achieve that.
Yeah. Well, both of those signs are personal business signs as opposed to a brand. Mm-hmm. And where you get into the most conflict, I think, is when you have somebody come in that's a chain or a brand, and they say, here's our corporate sign, here's how we want to do it, and their attitude is kind of take it or leave it.
Yeah.
And so somewhere in the middle of that, we have to figure out a way to do that. I'll give you a funny example. In Salzburg, in the old part of Salzburg in Austria, they have all the old guild signs, and there's an area in there downtown where you can use guild signs only. And I do have a picture that I have to show you sometime, Maureen. It's a McDonald's that they put in a guild sign. So you see the little guild sign with the little tiny golden arches. So that satisfied their brand, and it also satisfied the signage requirement for that part of downtown Salzburg. So,
so I just add on page 49 for sign lighting, in section G3, it says exposed neons should be carefully and sparingly used in signs, but it doesn't say it is prohibited.
Okay.
It doesn't, in F1, there's a list of the prohibited signs, and it does prohibit flashing signs.
Okay. I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think that addresses that issue.
Are you concerned about like big box letters type signs? We have.
I think that's probably what the guidelines would suggest, and I think Tina's is done tastefully, and I just want to make sure that we don't adopt guidelines that would eliminate the ability to do that, for other owners, and that Alex confirmed that. So moving on to A4, it talks about sandwich board signs, and I thought I remembered that we don't allow sandwich signs. And if we don't allow sandwich signs, we shouldn't have a picture that says, don't do this, but do this, if we don't allow them to begin with.
Yeah, I remember a very long, drawn-out conversation back when you and I were both on the planning commission, Maureen,
Yeah.
where that was back on one of the times we wanted to squeeze up San Pablo Avenue.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of do calming stuff to that part.
Yeah.
And one of the things that came up, I think, because somebody wanted to do a sandwich sign, but it took up all the sidewalk or something like that. And that started a very long conversation. I don't remember how that ended up.
Yeah, I don't either, but I just wanted to highlight this. Maybe this is like the fourth bookmark that we give to staff.
Mm-hmm.
And I would like to know what is the situation? What is our permitted? What statements exist that allows the sandwich signs? Because they are definitely out there, and I thought it seems to me we've been making exceptions given COVID and our interest in having and allowing promotion of various types for the small.
Yeah, and I think we're just having our limited code enforcement staff focus on health and safety issues and.
Right.
And ADA issues, because they block the sidewalk, but they're also temporary. So if they're in the way, you can move them.
Yeah.
But then the question is, where do you move them to? You don't want to put them in the street, and you want someone to trip on them because they're just barely outside, or they're right on the edge and of the required zone and whatever. So.
If I could refer us to the specific area. Again, in chapter 7.0, page 27, refers specifically to A-frame signs are allowed in Old Town. A-frame or sandwich board signs shall maintain a minimum of 4 feet of clear sidewalk at all times, etc. So there is direct language starting on page 26 regarding signage.
Okay. Thank you, Anne. So you can strike my concern there.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for that. I have a funny story about signs. If we have time, I'll save it for last.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't have any other comments.
Thank you for your careful review. Anyone else?
Yeah, only on page 44, section 8, 8.1a, there's just a spelling error in the last sentence. All signage, it says all Signage. So not a big deal.
Kinda is.
Well, I Signage is a whole other chapter.
And done during the holidays.
That gets us into our Signage guidelines. So.
I just want to make the point that some communities actually are very forward thinking in terms of what they allow as far as signage and not as far as height requirements, which makes a huge difference in how a town feels or how a section of town feels. So if we wanted to be very specific about how tall a sign could be in Old Town, I think there are definite examples in communities around us that that do not allow signs over a certain height or anything like that. So I don't know if we would want to get into that again, but it makes a difference. You know what it's like when you're in usually it's a wealthier area. Usually it's an area that they're very, very specific about what kinds of signs, and even McDonald's signs can't be tall, but they can be, short with the golden arches. So I don't know if we wanted to address that at all, and I don't remember seeing anything here.
That might be in the municipal code.
Let's see.
Yeah, and sometimes signage is a whole other conversation.
Yeah,
so complex. But David, the best one I've seen in a lot of years to look at is the one for Pittsburgh.
Pittsburgh,
because they handled a lot of back in the redevelopment area. They did a lot of stuff with their downtown. Okay. And their downtown had some similarities to Old Town because there was a lot of older buildings, and they were trying to replicate and kind of bring more older looking buildings in, even though they're new. And They had signs, areas, colors, blade signs, how to deal with branding. It was fairly comprehensive. Yeah. And the illustrations were really good on that. So that's a good one to look at as an example of what we're talking about, I would think.
All right, I'll pull that.
I'd be curious too, David, if in town that is as comprehensive about signs, if those were created along with a business district. So, with the specific business owners that align that area. Okay. Because I'm thinking that if there are some particular styles and materials and colors to be used, that somehow some group needs to come to agreement about that. And it would be those folks who are mostly affected. Because the signs would be immediately outside their doors. So the question is, who was involved in creating their sign program?
Yeah, in most cases, I can tell you, it's usually the city working with the CBDs and doing some public outreach because signage is a very sensitive issue with businesses and how and what they can and can't do. And when we start really regulating signage, you want to fill a room. I can fill a room with a couple of topics because in most cases, there's a lot of what usually happens is that there's a lot of non-conforming uses that start popping up in terms of signage in most cities or most down like special districts. Like we'll have like a grandfather like. For 5 years, you can only have that for 5 years, and then it's time to take them down and put up new signs. And so it's all. I mean, I had that in one of the cities that I worked in the Old Town area, where they completed a whole new sign plan, and all the old signs that were there within 5 years had to be gone. And so there was a lot of course, you had different property owners, you had different. I mean, it was just a mess. So signage is. I think we just need to be very careful when we're crafting our the sign stuff for this area, because the businesses will come out and they'll definitely have a say in what they're doing.
Well, and if we look at, for instance, on page 45, design A, number 7, large signs designed to attract the attention of motorists on the freeway are not permitted.
Yeah.
Well, of course, we have, exceptions to that,
right?
With sprouts and with, all of those right in that area, and those are in the.
Yeah, I mean, we've got some pretty decent guidelines, on pages 45 and tell us what kind of signs should be given and those types of things. Maybe some more pictures, but I'll take a look at Pittsburgh and see what they did. Maybe there's some more pictures or some other type of function that would help do that. So.
Yeah, what's going to happen around a freeway and a shopping center around a freeway, like Pinole Valley Shopping Center and that kind of thing, is far different than what would happen down in Old Town.
Right.
So situation is very. Even that, the Pinole Valley Shopping Center sign, when that came through the planning commission, I think we reduced that by. They wanted it to really be 10 feet higher, and we reduced that.
That's good. That's really good. And so, but this is where we think about what our district, the overlay district is. And so to which areas do we apply these specific guidelines?
Right.
So that would be important, especially coming back to, I can't remember who it was brought it up. I think it was the mayor about the bowling alley, for instance, redoing that.
Redeveloping that property.
So yeah, if that were to ever be done.
Yeah. I don't want to take credit for that. It was Councilmember Tom's, but yeah, it's a consideration. So are we through to page 51 of our guidelines for the day? Okay. Staff, any additional things that we ought to keep in mind as a committee?
No, I was just going to say, one of the things the committee wanted to talk about was the compatibility with the specific plan. I think we've certainly done that tonight and provided some direction on, 2 or 3 or 4 items where we'll go in and make sure it's compatible.
Thank you, everyone. So now we're on to the next item on our agenda, and that's to take a look at the review process for projects in the historic preservation overlay, as we had agreed to last time we met, and we determined what would be included in the overlay. I do have a question about that. I'm not sure. Please remind me if we covered the point of if there were structures deemed historic, however that is determined, other than along San Pablo in the more obvious area. How could we bring them in to be, if not on the map part of the overlay, part of the process for that review?
Yes. So any property, regardless of where it is in the city, could be added to the overlay zone. And so the process would be, the same as a zoning amendment. It would, and this is spelled out in the ordinance too, but, it would go to the planning commission and then, to the city council to decide, because adding something to the overlay is a zoning change of the property.
Okay, thank you. So we've got a way to address those other.
But we could fix the map through this process, because we talked about along the creek.
Mm-hmm. And that, I don't think that shows in the version that has gone, but we have that noted that row of houses where there had been some discussion of whether or not to include it will be included in the map.
So quick question, because again, the specific plan does have an Old Town sub area, which is the map for that is very different than what the original overlay district map we had. And that was on page 6.0, page 13. And so we need to just again reflect back on this and change it in the specific plan to reflect back on what we changed, I think, in the overlay district ideas.
Let's see.
It's figure 6.1.
It's what? I'm sorry.
Figure 6.1.
Yeah.
Oh, wait. Yeah, it says San Pablo Avenue sub area framework, and it's got the Old Town sub area in there. And actually, if I No, because even the Pinole Valley Road sub-area framework, the Old Town sub-area does not include down past Fernandez Park.
Yeah, it doesn't include the railroad tracks. But I think that the specific plan sub-area doesn't necessarily have to match the Old Town guideline sub-area.
Are you sure that doesn't make that confusing?
Yeah.
It does.
Why would you not want those to be consistent?
You would want them to be consistent if you can, but it's a huge ordeal amending the specific plan to fold in all of those areas.
So we've got an
And the
overlay.
specific plan is really about, these they're very narrow corridors. And the Old Town, the historic overlay zone is, much more of a square.
It's more about design, not necessarily land use.
Right.
Really?
I'm thinking yes as well.
I mean, the guidelines are more about design. The specific plan is design and land use.
So I think my first phone call to you guys would be, which one do I follow?
Well, where's your property at?
What if,
Yeah, where's your property?
what if it's in that same area? I mean, what if it's right on the edge where it could either be the narrow part or the square part? Which one do I follow?
Well, that's why we want to have the guidelines consistent with the specific plan, not the other way around.
Right. Okay.
So where does that leave us with the map of the overlay? Does it fit on the map of the specific plan?
No.
And I think that was Commissioner Moriarty's point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, the map, the Old Town area is covered pretty much. Okay, you have the San Pablo Old Town area. And if you're looking at land use and zoning, and then you have the Pinole Valley Road, which goes all the way down to Henry. So pretty much from Park to Henry, there is an Old Town, whether it's in Pinole Valley Road or San Pablo corridor, there are guidelines to cover that area. So from Park to the west, to Henry to the east, to Pinole Valley Road, to whether that be the north, and it looks like the school down to Henry, 2300 Henry to the east. So all that area it would be covered. So the area that's not covered would be the area I'm just gonna say, for lack of a better term on the thing, north of Park Street towards Orleans and those areas out by Fernandez Park, those areas would all be included as part of the overlay. They're not included as in the specific plan. But if you're looking at it, this area would only be, they would have their own zoning, but they still would be responsible for the guidelines. So in terms of the design guidelines for this overlay district, it would be the design of the structure, whatever they're building, that we would look at these guidelines for. The zoning would come from the zoning ordinance. So the setbacks and all that, which we're looking to amend here, would be brought out of the zoning ordinance, where the design of the building, the design of all that would come out of the design guidelines. So that's how that would kind of work. At least, Alex, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but that's kind of how that would work. So if it's not in one of the specific plan corridors, it's outside of those, then it would be the zoning ordinance and the design guidelines.
Right.
That would rule. Like if someone were to come in to build windows on a property on what are those streets? Let's say on Orleans.
Okay.
then we would look at the design, we look at the zoning to see what the zoning setbacks were and all that kind of stuff. And then we would look at the design guidelines to see if there were design guidelines that needed to be implemented. So it not necessarily has to be consistent with the specific plan in that area, but the areas that are in the specific plan need to be consistent with the areas in the specific plan. Because our map for the design, unless you want to make the map consistent with the specific plan, the design guideline map, consistent with the specific plan map, then we take out all that other area from the top.
Well, and the other area that it takes out on 6.0, page 29, is the whole Sprouts and Kaiser and all that is not included in the Old Town.
Right. So if I was to get a project within that area, I would take a look at the Old Town, the service area, because they're in the service area sub area and they're zoned OPMU. So I would take a look at what those requirements were, and then take a look at these guidelines because they would be within the historic overlay guidelines to see if they're consistent with those guidelines. So that's how I would implement a project that came in that was in the guidelines.
So remember how the mayor was saying, I need to have this come out and make it so I can understand it? Well, you just said, I don't understand it. And I'm supposed to know all this kind of stuff.
Right.
Well, it's
that's what you're describing is very complex and it's going to be conflicting.
Where there's a conflict, if there is a conflict, which we have throughout our codes, for example, the zoning code says A-frames are prohibited in the whole city, but the specific plan says that they're allowed in Old Town. So the specific plan controls in the hierarchy, you know, the specific plan and general plan control, then the zoning code, then any design guidelines. So to the extent there are any conflicts between them, which in an ideal world, we would not have any, and we'll make sure there aren't any in the guidelines, but there's some that, you know, are floating around previously. Whatever is superior would control.
And I believe.
How would you define superior? By more stringent or?
So if there's a conflict, so if one says, so there's a conflict if you can't comply with both. So if one says you have to have a minimum of 10-foot setbacks and the other one says you have to have a minimum of 20-foot setbacks, there's not a conflict because you can comply with both by just having a 20-foot setback.
What if I wanted a 10-foot setback?
Well, you would have to do a 20 because you have to comply with both. Now, if one says...
Well, to me, that's a conflict.
Well, no, a conflict is when you can't comply with both. So if one says you can have a maximum...
a conflict is when you have one that conflicts with the other. That's also...
But they don't conflict, right? Minimum, you are meeting both requirements if you have a 20-foot setback, right? Because it says you have to have one document says you have to have a minimum 10-foot setback. The other says you have to have a minimum 20. If you have a 20-foot setback, you are also complying with the requirement that you have a minimum of 10.
But if you have a minimum of 10, you're not complying with the 20.
Right, but I think it's a matter of which document says that you can have 10. If it's the specific plan, that takes precedent over the design guidelines or the zoning ordinance. Is that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to bring up is I went down to figure 6.6, which is the specific plan area for Pinole Valley Road. And, it's not that, we didn't name that Old Town sub area. So the sub area named Old Town in the specific plan isn't necessarily the same thing as the design guideline historic overlay. And they don't need to be.
No.
I think I'm using too much bandwidth. Keep freezing.
Just to make sure that I understand what you're saying, though. So I think it's actually figure 6.5 that you're referring to. Is that correct?
I have. It could be 6.5. Right.
Okay, great. So just as for example, that this map that we have shows the whole Sprouts, Kaiser, bowling alley, Dr. Lee's building as being in the service sub area, not the Old Town sub area.
Right.
So from what Alex was talking about hierarchy, then is it that, say someone were going to design something on the, again, going back to the bowling area property, could we say that you have to follow the Old Town design guidelines? Or they say, well, according to this map, we're not in the Old Town sub area, therefore we do not have to. And because specific plan is superior to Old Town design guidelines.
I think the unfortunate thing is the naming of the sub area. In Old Town sub area is a very small area where we named the historic preservation overlay area to include a larger area. And then we went ahead and named the specific plan sub area that just applies. So the two don't have to have the same names. It would be really handy if they didn't. But it would have to apply, they'd have to comply with the specific plan first, the specific plan for the service area in the specific plan, and then the design guidelines, because the design guidelines do cover that geographic area.
And perhaps one thing that might be a little helpful is if we rename the guidelines, the historic preservation overlay design guidelines, rather than the Old Town design guidelines. So it's sort of clearer
that would help, because there's a lot of conflict in that up to that point. So when they came,
I would be happy with something like that, so that there isn't, a developer who could argue saying, well, and you're saying, well, such and such. And so we could have a serious issue with that. So, Alex, what was your suggested, the historic preservation overlay district?
Yeah, and that would match exactly we're calling it the historic preservation overlay zone. And so if we just call the guidelines the historic preservation overlay design guidelines, those two sort of directly matched each other. And then the Old Town area, is called something, the Old Town in the specific plan, Old Town sub area is called something different.
Could we maybe include a paragraph about, in the introduction, about how these fit in with the general plan and the different specific plan sub areas, just to kind of give us a, getting from here to there kind of thing?
Yeah, I think you're going to have to.
Yeah, and I think at the last meeting we agreed that we wanted to see that hierarchy that we're supposed to follow. It just I'm picturing a visual, some sort of visual that allows us to see that, make it obvious which is the document to abide by, or a set of documents.
Yeah, and we noted that on the last one, because I've got a note hierarchy of documents.
Yeah,
so we noted
run into that again tonight. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So it's 6:48 on my clock, and I know that we want to dedicate some good time to the next item on the agenda, but I'm not sure that we'll get through it unless someone can identify the issues underlying the need for a discussion, and then in about 4 minutes, and in about 5 minutes resolve all that. So I don't think it's going to happen.
Okay.
The item was a carryover of, right now the properties in any project in the historic preservation overlay zone is going to go through the otherwise applicable design review process. So, to oversimplify, big projects would go to the planning commission, small projects would go to the zoning administrator. And there was some discussion of whether should there be a different process for these projects in the historic preservation overlay, so that it's not just the zoning administrator for smaller projects. And that was just a issue that was discussed the last time, and I think left open.
Yes, and we have about 7 minutes to get through it. So again, if it's an issue for someone on the committee, you've got a couple minutes, or will you need more time? And so to give it due amount of time for discussion and have us come away with a satisfactory, practical view of the process, an acceptable view of the process. Do we have enough time for that, or do we again carry it over?
Yes, if I can just chime in a little here. Is that okay?
Please.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. I guess what I've seen in other cities is that they have an entire design review board. So it's a group of folks, community leaders, so on and so forth, that get together to review and try to ensure that the guidelines in theory are implemented on these projects. So it's more a community group that's really running these projects. So as opposed to just city staff doing it, or maybe it becomes a subsection of the Planning Commission, but that's how I've seen other cities handle it. What's our appetite to try and build out something like that for this type of project?
Well, I'm thinking that there is of the Planning Commission already. I thought what was at issue was that initial review and the mistrust of the initial reviewer about proceeding to call in a group, subset of the Planning Commission or otherwise. So I'd like to get to the heart of that. Otherwise, we're going to go around in circles.
I can speak to that because I was the one who brought that up initially when we were on the Planning Commission. And so my fear was that we would, at some point in time, have a planning manager who did not have the experience and the working, with historic districts such as Mr. Hannum has, and that decisions would be made of what kinds of ways that the design guidelines would be implemented that would be contrary to the charge that we have been given to maintain the character of our historic preservation overlay district. And so the mistrust was not at a specific person, but at a process that could leave the community out of the decision-making process when only staff was making those decisions. And so I'm open to change on that. I'm open to, I realize that if we have a design review board, a community board, like Commissioner Martinez was, brought up, I realize it would take a whole lot of time. And the question is, do we have the appetite to do something like that? My guess is that in Pinole, we don't. I'm not sure if that's the case, but that's, my general feeling. And so, do we want to discuss it more? Maybe not. It depends upon what the rest of the group feels. I'm happy to back off of that, but it was a general statement, not aimed at any one person in particular. That's all.
Understood. Yes, thank you. And thanks for clarifying that, because it could be anyone in the position.
Yeah, I can chime in. We had a design review board a long time ago, and we had a lot of conflict bouncing back between a design review board and the Planning Commission, where we had different ideas on, how a design should go. So I think that what we have now with the committee of Commissioners Moriarty, Martinez, and Banuelos being on the design review committee, that's the best, the best way to handle that piece. It's just a matter of what projects rise to the level of getting referred to the committee that may only meet once a month, and you want to delay a building permit for that period of time if it's something really non-controversial, that shouldn't be. So it's a matter of what's the threshold to kick it to the committee for their input. So I think that's kind of the question. And should the design guidelines identify what that threshold is?
And I'm going to,
Go ahead.
thank you. I'm going to add that that's where this matter of discretion and judgment comes into play, which we can't regulate. It's not dictated by policy necessarily, and that judgment and discretion, to some degree, is the prerogative of staff, along with the tools that we might create, and such as the guidelines. And the community input is the Planning Commission, is the subgroups of the Planning Commission. We are, and for all intents and purposes, also the council. We are members of the community. So that's what comes to mind.
I'm just wondering if Michael was going to have something. I know you have the answer, Michael.
Oh, no. I was just, I guess I was just thinking about, well, one thing I think has fallen through the cracks. I think there's several categories here. So first of all, you've got, like exterior improvements such as windows, roofs, siding. So if someone were to walk in for a building permit for that, those just, I think, need to be checked by planning staff for consistency, and that those would be really simple. Then I think the next category is, like a square footage. And I think 500 square feet would work pretty well, which, I think you have to at least trust the staff to say, like, if it's an addition to an existing building that's 500 square feet, then that would be, kind of the next category. And then beyond that, then you'd want to, I think, then I think you'd want to, then involve the committee and then the Planning Commission. And I apologize. I guess I would defer to Dave what those thresholds are that we currently use for, for the design review. I think it just would make it a lot simpler if you're able to keep it within this kind of the same parameters, unless you're seeing that there's a problem with that.
Right. I mean, the admin, it's 500 square feet. Right now we have an admin design review. Anything less than 500 feet goes through what we call our admin design review process, which is pretty much staff approval at that point. The windows, the way it is right now, the windows and everything already come through staff. We review it, and then it moves forward. So that's the current process that we use right now. So if that isn't sufficient for historic buildings or in the historic overlay district, then we need to make sure that at least staff understands what that next step would be. So if the committee feels that in the commission that windows and roof lines, and not necessarily roofs, but windows and architectural design features, staircases, all that kind of stuff needs to be referred to the committee, which at this point would call the Planning Commission Ad Hoc Committee. That's what we're looking at. I mean, I think right now, like what Michael was talking about, that's what we do right now, and that's I think what Ann is trying to say is that sometimes that doesn't work, or that maybe the window design isn't what is in the historic guideline, and here staff's already approved it, and now there is no appeal process, there is no public review process. Correct me if I'm wrong, but so my feeling is that and I told this to the committee before, any type of layer that you will add will create time. It will. There's no ifs, no ands, or buts. It will at least anywhere between a 2 to 4 week delay going to the ad hoc committee. So if that's palatable for the committee, for the commission and the council, which I know you're hearing a lot right now about our processes and how we're behind and that right now. But in this area, it will delay because, and it's meant to do that. To be honest, if that's what you want in terms of design feature, it's meant to delay, to have people look at it. From my perspective, we're the front line. We'll have to deal with those complaints and the processes, but that's the way it works. So it's just because the council and commissioners you will be heard, like especially if there's a window on John Street and we're saying no, that window isn't appropriate. It's not consistent. So I'm going to take it to the historic review committee, which is the ad hoc committee. It's going to take me at least a week to get them assembled. And I mean, that's the one thing about the ad hoc committee. I can call them together, and get a notice up and do all that fairly quickly. But it's still going to take between a week and 2 weeks to get them together to make that final decision.
Sure. Thank you. If I may, I'm going to interrupt just a bit because it is
ahead.
7 o'clock and I want to be respectful of all's time. Given where we are in this discussion, it is a committee's choice to, as an example, vivid example, do we want to meet again on this single topic because you believe it merits more attention or not? And then that'll be, we'll decide about scheduling.
I would be happy if the staff report just references what the thresholds are already. I'm hearing that it's working well the way it is, but if not, then we can probably have another meeting and discuss it. But if it's kind of written in the staff report so that it's sort of on record of what the process is, that would work for me.
I'm sorry, in which staff report?
This is going to go to the Planning Commission.
And
it's going to have a staff report. So if anybody was ever wondering what the intent was, it would be recorded there in the staff report.
I appreciate that, and I would just like to hear Commissioner or Banuelos's thoughts, just because he comes from both directions, both as a supplicant and as a planning person. Tim, if you don't mind, what your thoughts are.
Well, I'm a little conflicted on this. When I was on the Planning Commission the first time, we had Design Review Board, like Maureen mentioned, and Design Review Board was like an elephant on the back of the city. Mm-hmm. And the main reason for that was they had no guidelines. And in fact, so everything took forever because everyone was basing it off their own opinion, which was all over the place. And my very first night on the Planning Commission then, and this was like 2005, there was a house that was being discussed, and it was the second time in front of the Planning Commission. The people were upset that they were growing old while the city was trying to deal with their house. And my question was, well, how are you guys figuring this out? Are there any guidelines to go by? And they said, well, no. I said, well, there's your problem. The problem is not the project. Problem is there's no process. Now we have process. So I am, and I'm kind of thinking about the way we have it. I tend to agree with how it's evolved, because what happened was the guidelines were in such a position as their first go round was such that it kind of negated the need for a design review board. And so that's why we don't have one anymore, because the guidelines took it over. And now in the process of that, the design committee within the Planning Commission came up, because that didn't come right away. It came a little bit later. And I think that's a good way to get the Planning Commission ready for a lot of these projects. And so, and I think that works pretty well. And I'm kind of like, if it's not broken, don't fix it in terms of that kind of a thing. Now, there are always going to be exceptions to that. And I can't think of any in the last 5 or 10 years that have come up that way. But I think we're going to be in a position now in the future, as with all these overlays on top of overlays because of where things are. I'm kind of concerned about the confusion still between things on the street versus things around it. The line versus the box. I'm still a little bit iffy on that. So I have a lot of faith in staff right now, and I would tend to kind of keep it the way it is. And I think what's going to have to happen is we're going to have to see how it works when things get a little bit complex, because I think we are kind of building in some complexity in some of these things. As you know, as I sit here and kind of think, how would I deal with this project? This were my project, and I have two different overlays going in the same place. Now, there are those that try to figure out what's going on, and then the developers say, how can I divide and conquer between these two and get what I want? Because I'll hire a planner to find me some flaws. So that's my internal conundrum I'm trying to figure out with all this, if that makes sense. But I think as things go, I wouldn't want to have a design review board again, because I think our committee takes care of that and our staff takes care of that, because now we have guidelines to back us up, the original guidelines and the guidelines we've been talking about all along these past few meetings. I think that's going to help out a lot. For starters, there's always going to be, what I mentioned is the exception, and I'm not even sure how often that would even happen. But I think we're in a better position than we were 15 years ago in terms of trying to figure out how to deal with the areas we're talking about. So I don't know if that answers your question totally, but I'm kind of in favor of leaving things as they are, and let's take it for a spin. And if we have to fix it, we'll fix it.
Okay, thank you for that. If we want to ponder, consider that, I would like to know, or perhaps we'll put it out as part of the email that Alex would send out as a follow-up, whether we would like to continue or not. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure we're at a good place tonight to have staff prepare whatever would be the next step in us going through a process of having the ordinance one way or another brought back to council. Because my recollection is we had this committee to get through an exercise about reviewing the guidelines. That's been done. We've done some comparisons as we've discovered, having to have some consistencies with the specific plans. Staff's taken note. We're going to come back. We're going to see perhaps a future meeting would be indeed taking a look at the document that staff would have prepared for one last look about its readiness to go to the next body, which I believe is the council. But somehow Planning Commission was mentioned too. So please, Alex, if you can clarify for us.
It doesn't need to go back to the council, to the Planning Commission, because they already considered this. And they considered the guidelines and made recommendations. So the council still has the authority to, make changes, because this is all information they considered and made their recommendation to the council. I mean, the plan, and the Commissioner Mori already mentioned, the Planning Commission talked about, should there be a different process or not? And so because the Planning Commission already discussed everything and made their recommendation, it doesn't need to go back to them. So it could go straight back to the council for its.
Thank you. Okay. So then I'm going to do as we do in the council, and that is, do we have consensus about having concluded our charge as a committee so that staff may prepare its report, which means that included in that is that our discussion about the review process ends this evening.
If I can chime in, what I'd like to propose is that we get a clean copy of all the changes that have been implemented and ensure that they're really tight, and all the items that we've been addressing in all of the prior meetings are in one concise document for another set of eyes to review before making a final decision on this document, if you're agreeable to that.
We are the eyes.
Right.
So I think there's validity to that week because we've gone through 3 meetings, and I've already forgotten what we talked at the beginning. So I think seeing everything now as a composite, I think would kind of get us ready for the next step relative to staff taking a crack at it. And I think it'd be good just to kind of do an overview of what we've all talked about and see it all in one piece. And if there's any last minute comments, it could be a comment that we, one of us has on something. It could be an email to staff and say, hey, you may want to think about this part. I saw this and I'm kind of wondering about this. And maybe when you do your thing, maybe that's something you want to think about. I mean, that would be, I don't think we need to have another meeting about something like that, but I think that would be a way to respond on anything that kind of catches anybody's eye as its last look.
Which tells me then that pretty much we're taking a look at what we believe has been recorded, and what has been recorded has been agreed upon by this committee already. So
right.
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's just those, those 3 areas where we ask staff to, take a look at, and we can, take a look at that after it's been incorporated and provide comments on that. If out of the comments that there's a lot of disagreement, perhaps we have another meeting to sort it out, but it should be straightforward.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I don't want us to leave. Are we done discussing the review process?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I say so.
Yeah.
I think so too.
I'm good.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Well, thank you for your time, everyone. At 7:11, I think I'd like to adjourn. What do you say? Anything else, Alex, staff? All right, everyone, have a good evening.
I'm sorry, Madam Mayor. I would like to just say that tomorrow's my last day working with the City of Pinole, and I've really enjoyed working with all of you. I've taken a position with the City of San Bruno as their planning manager, so I'll be moving on. But I think you're in good hands, and so I wish you all well, and I've enjoyed working with you.
Congratulations.
Good luck to you.
Congratulations. Thank you.
Hopefully our paths will cross again.
Yes, I hope so. Take care.
All right.
For your work.
Bye.
Good night, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Okay.